back reading, reading Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. If you're not caught up in the book, we'll start at part 1. You know this ain't part 1. It says right in the thing. So yeah, let's get started. Anyway, there wasn't really anywhere else to go. The cassette finished activating the car radio. God knows question time coming to you from Tadfield Gardening Club. We were the last here in 1953. A very nice summer, and as the team will remember, it's a rich Oxfordshire loam in the east of the parish, rising to Chalk in the west. The kind of place, I say, don't matter what you plant here, it'll come up beautiful. Isn't that right, Fred? Yep, said Professor Fred Winbright, Royal Botanical Gardens. Couldn't have put it better myself. Right. First question for the team, and this comes from Mr. R.P. Tyler, chairman of the local residents association, I do believe. That's right. Well, I'm a keen rose grower, but my prize-winning Molly McGuire lost a couple blossoms yesterday in a rain of what were apparently fish. What does the team recommend for this, other than place netting over the garden? I mean, I've written to the council. Not a common problem, I'd say. Mr. Tyler, let me ask you a question. Were these fresh fish or preserved? Fresh, I believe. Well, you've got no problems, my friend. I hear you've also been having rains of blood in these pots. And I wish we had these up in the Dales, where my garden is. Save me a fortune in fertilizers. Now what you do is you dig them into your... Crowley said nothing. Crowley, the war has begun, Crowley. We note with interest that you avoided the forces we empowered to collect you. Crowley agreed. Crowley, we will win this war, but even if we lose, at least as far as you are concerned, it will make no difference at all. For as long as there's one demon left in hell, Crowley, you will wish you had been created mortal. Crowley was silent. Mortals can hope for death or redemption. You can hope for nothing. All you can hope for is the mercy of hell. Yeah? Just our little joke? Okay, said Crowley. Now, as keen gardeners know, it goes without saying that he's a cunning little devil. You're Tibetan tunneling straight through your begonias like it was nobody's business. A cup of tea will shift 'em. With rancid yak butter for preference, you should be able to get some at any good god. Wee whiz pop. Static drown out the rest of the program. I'm not doing that sound effect this time. Crowley turned off the radio and bit his lower lip. Beneath the ashen soot that flaked his face, he looked very tired and very pale and very scared, and suddenly very angry. It was the way they talked to you, as if you were a houseplant who had started shedding leaves on the carpet. And then he turned a corner, which was meant to take him onto the slip road to the M25, from which he'd swing off onto the M40 up to Oxfordshire. But something had happened to the M25, something that hurt your eyes if you looked directly at it. From what had been the M25 London orbital motorway came a low chanting, a noise formed of many strands, car horns and engines and sirens, and the bleep of cellular telephones. and the screaming of small children trapped by backseat seatbelts forever. Hail the great beast, devourer of worlds, came the chanting over and over in the secret tongue of the black priesthood of ancient Mu. The dreaded Sigil Odegra, thought Crowley as he swung the car around heading for the North Circular. I did that. That's my fault. Could have been just another motorway. A good job, I'll grant you, but was it really worthwhile? It's all out of control. Heaven and hell aren't running things anymore. It's like the whole planet is a third world country that's finally got the bomb. Then he began to smile. He snapped his fingers. A pair of dark glasses materialized out of his eyes, and ash vanished from his suit and his skin. What the hell? If you have to go out, why not go out with style? Whistling softly, he drove. They came down the outside lane of the motorway like destroying angels, which was fair enough. They weren't going that fast, all things considered. The four of them were holding a steady 105 miles per hour, as if they were confident that the show could not start before they got there. It couldn't. They had all the time in the world, such as it was. Just behind them came the four other riders, Big Ted, Greaser, Pigbog, and Scuzz. They were elated. They were real Hell's Angels now, and they rode the silence. Around them, they knew, was the roar of the thunderstorm, the thunder of traffic, the whipping of the wind and the rain. But in the wake of the horsemen, there was silence, pure and dead. Almost pure, anyway. Certainly dead. It was broken by Pigbog, shouting to Big Ted. "What are you gonna be, then?" he asked hoarsely. "What?" "I said, what are you?" "I heard what you said. It's not what you said." "Everyone heard what you said. What did you mean? That's what I want to know." Pigbog wished he'd paid more attention to the Book of Revelation. If he'd known he was going to be in it, he'd have read it more carefully. "What I mean is, they're the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right?" "Bikers," said Greaser. "Right. Four bikers of the apocalypse. War, famine, death, and the other one, pollution." "Yeah. So they said it was alright if we came with them, right?" So we're the other four bikers of the apocalypse. So which ones are we? There was a pause. The lights of passing cars shot past them in the opposite lane. Lightning after imaged the clouds, and the silence was close to absolute. "Can I be war as well?" asked Big Ted. "Of course you can't be war. How can you be war? She's war. You've got to be something else." Big Ted screwed up his face with the effort of thought. "GBH, he said eventually. "I'm grievous bodily harm." "That's me. There. What are you gonna be?" "Can I be rubbish?" asked Guz. "Or embarrassing personal problems?" Can't be rubbish, said Grievous Bodily Harm. "He's got that one sewn up, pollution. You can be the other, though." They rode on in the silence, in the dark, the rear red lights of the four a few hundred yards in front of them. Grievous Bodily Harm, embarrassing personal problems, Pigbog and Greaser. "I want to be cruelty to animals," said Greaser. Pigbog wondered if he was for or against it. Not that it really mattered. And then it was Pigbog's turn. I think I'll be them anthophones. They're pretty bad," he said. "You can't be anthophones. What kind of a biker of the Repocalypse," and it says Repocalypse, just saying, "is anthophones? That's stupid, that is." "It's not. said Pigbog, nettled. It's like war and famine and that. It's a problem of life, isn't it? Answer phones. I hate bloody answer phones. I hate answer phones too, said Cruelty to Animals. You can shut up, said GBH. Can I change mine? Asked Embarrassing Personal Problems, who had been thinking intently since he last spoke. I want to be things not working properly even after you've given them a good thumping. All right, you can change, but you can't be answer phones, Pigbog. Pick something else. Pigbog pondered. He wished he'd never broached the subject. It was like the careers interview he had when he was a schoolboy. He deliberated. Really cool people, he said at last. I hate them. Really cool people? I said things not working properly even after you've given them a good thumping. Yeah, you know, the kind you see on telly with the stupid haircuts, only on them it don't look stupid 'cause it's them. They wear baggy suits and you're not allowed to say they're a bunch of wankers. I mean, speaking for me, what I will always want to do when I see one of them is push their faces very slowly through a barbed wire fence. And what I think is, he took a deep breath. He was sure this was the longest speech he had ever made in his life. What I think is this. If they get up my nose like that, they probably get up everyone else's. Yeah, said Cruelty to Animals. And they all wear sunglasses even when they don't need them. Eating runny cheese and that stupid bloody no alcohol lager. Said things not working properly even after you've given them a good thumping. I hate that stuff. What's the point of drinking this stuff if it don't leave you puking? Here, I just thought, can I change then? So I'm no alcohol lager. No, you bloody can't, said Grievous Bodily Harm. You've changed once already. Anyway, said Pigbog, that's why I want to be really cool people. All right, said his leader. Don't see why I can't be. No bloody alcohol lager if I want. Shut your face. Death and famine and war and pollution continued biking toward Tadfield. And grievous bodily harm, cruelty to animals, and things not working properly even after you've given them a good thumping, but secretly no alcohol lager, and really cool people traveled with them. It was a wet and blustery Saturday afternoon, and Madame Tracy was feeling very occult. She had her flowing dress on and a saucepan full of sprouts on the stove. The room was lit by candlelight, each candle carefully placed in a wax-encrusted wine bottle at the four corners of her sitting room. There were 3 other people in her sitting. Mrs. Ormerod, from Belsize Park, in a dark green hat that might have been a flower pot in a previous life. Mr. Scroggy, thin and pallid, with bulging, colorless eyes, and Julia Petley, from Hair Today, the hairdressers on the high street, fresh out of school and convinced that she herself had unplumbed occult depths. In order to enhance the occult aspects of herself, Julia had begun to wear far too much hand-beaten silver jewelry and green eyeshadow. She felt she looked haunted and gaunt and romantic, and she would have if she had lost another 30 pounds. She was convinced that she was anorexic because every time she looked in the mirror, she did indeed see a fat person. "Can you link hands?" asked Madame Tracy. "And we must have complete silence. The spirit world is very sensitive to vibration." "Ask if Miron is there," said Mrs. Ormerod. She had a jaw like a brick. "I will, love. But you got to be quiet while I make contact." There was a silence, broken only by Mr. Scroggy's stomach rumbling. "Pardon, ladies," he mumbled. Madame Tracy had found, through years of drawing aside the veil and exploring the mysteries, that 2 minutes was the right length of time to sit in silence, waiting for the spirit world to make contact. More than that, and they got restive. Less than that, and they felt they weren't getting their money's worth. She did her shopping list in her head. Eggs, lettuce, ounce of cooking cheese, 4 tomatoes. Or does she say tomatoes? 4 tomatoes. Butter, roll of toilet paper. Mustn't forget that, we're nearly out. And a really nice piece of liver for Mr. Shadwell. Poor old soul. It's a shame. Time. Madame Tracy threw back her head and let it loll on one shoulder, then slowly lifted it again. Her eyes were almost shut. Looked just like this. That's how she did it. I'm certain of it. She's going under now, dear, she heard Mrs. Ormerod whisper to Julia Petley. Nothing to be alarmed about. She's just making herself a bridge to the other side. Her spirit guide will be along soon. Madame Tracy found herself rather irritated at being upstaged, and she let out a low moan. Oh. Then, in a high-pitched, quavery voice, "Are you there, my spirit guide?" She waited a little to build up the suspense, washing up liquid, 2 cans of baked beans, and potatoes. Did she say potatoes or potatoes? Whatever. "How?" she said in a dark brown voice. "Is that you, Geronimo?" she asked herself. "Is, me how?" she replied. "We have a new member of the circle with us this afternoon," she said. "How, Miss Petley?" she said as Geronimo. She had always understood that Red Indian spirit guides were an essential prop, and she rather liked the name. She had explained this to Newt. She didn't know anything about Geronimo, he realized, and he didn't have the heart to tell her. "Oh," squeaked Julia, "charmed to make your acquaintance. Is my Ron there, Geronimo?" asked Mrs. Ormerod. "How's Squall, Beryl?" said Madame Tracy. "Oh, there's so many, of the poor lost souls, lined up against, door to my teepee. Perhaps your Ron is amongst them. How?" Oh my god, I just realized that's how she's trying to say hi. Okay. I was like, why does she keep saying how? Okay, I get it. Madame Tracy had learned her lesson years earlier, and now never brought Ron through until near the end. If she didn't, Beryl Ormerod would occupy the rest of the seance, telling the late Ron Ormerod everything that had happened to her since the last little chat. "Now, Ron, you remember our Eric's littlest Sibylla? Well, you wouldn't recognize her now. She's taken up macrame. And our Letitia, you know, our Karen's oldest, she's become a lesbian, but that's all right these days, and it is doing a dissertation on the films of Sergio Leone, as seen from a feminine perspective. And our Stan, you know, our Sandra's twin. I told you about him last time. Well, he won the darts tournament, which is nice because we all thought he was a bit of a mother's boy. Well, the guttering over the sheds came loose, but I spoke to our Cindy's latest, who's a jobbing builder, and he'll be over to see it on Sunday. And oh, that reminds me. No, Beryl Ormerod would wait. There was a flash of lightning, followed by almost immediately a rumble of distant thunder. Madame Tracy felt rather proud, as if she had done it herself. It was even better than the candles at creating ambulance. Ambulance was what mediuming ambiance, but it says ambulance. Okay, whatever. Was what mediuming was all about. Now, said Madame Tracy in her own voice, Mr. Geronimo would like to know, is there anyone named Mr. Scroggy here? Scroggy's watery eyes gleamed. Actually, that's my name, he said hopefully. Right, well, there's somebody here for you. Mr. Scroggy had been coming for a month now, and she hadn't been able to think of a message for him. His time had come. Do you know anyone named, John? No, said Mr. Scroggy. Well, there's some celestial interference here. The name could be Tom, or Jim, or, Dave. I knew a Dave when I was in Hempstead, said Mr. Scroggy, a trifle doubtfully. Yes, he's saying Hempstead. That's what he's saying, said Madame Tracy, but I ran into him last week, walking his dog, and he looked perfectly healthy, said Mr. Scroggy, slightly puzzled. He says not to worry. And he's happier beyond the veil, soldiered on Madame Tracy, who felt it was always better to give her clients good news. Tell my Ron I've got to tell him about our Crystal's wedding, said Mrs. Ormerod. I will, love. Now, hold on a mo. There's something coming through. And then something came through. It sat in Madame Tracy's head and peered out. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? It said, using Madame Tracy's mouth. Parlez-vous français? Vous huijing jabongwing. Is that you, Ron? Asked Mrs. Ormerod. The reply, when it came, was rather testy. No, definitely not. However, a question so manifestly dim can only have been put in one country on this benighted planet, most of which, incidentally, I have seen during the last few hours. Dear lady, this is not Ron. Well, I want to speak to Ron Ormerod, said Mrs. Ormerod, a little testily. He's rather short, bald and on top. Can you put him on, please? There was a pause. Actually, there does appear to be a spirit of that description hovering over here. Very well, I'll hand you over, but you must make it quick. I am attempting to avert the apocalypse. Mrs. Ormerod and Mr. Scroggy gave each other looks. Nothing like this had happened at Madame Tracy's previous sittings. Julia Petley was rapt. This was more like it. She hoped Madame Tracy was going to start manifesting ectoplasm next. Hello, said Madame Tracy in another voice. Mrs. Ormerod sounded exactly like Ron. On previous occasions, Ron had sounded like Madame Tracy. Ron, is that you? Yes, but Beryl? Right. Now I've quite a bit to tell you. For a start, I went to our Crystal's wedding last Saturday, our Marilyn's eldest. But Beryl, you never let me get a word in edgewise while I was alive. Now I'm dead. There's just one thing to say. Beryl Ormerod was a little disgruntled by all this. Previously, when Ron had manifested, he had told her that he was happier beyond the veil and living somewhere that sounded more like a celestial bungalow. Now he sounded like Ron, and she wasn't sure that was what she wanted. And she said what she had always wanted. And she said what she had always said to her husband when he began to speak to her in that tone of voice. Ron, remember your heart condition? Don't have a heart any longer, remember? Anyway, but Beryl, yes, Ron. Shut up! And the spirit was gone. Wasn't that touching? Right now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I shall have to be getting on. Madame Tracy stood up, went over to the door, turned on the lights. Out, she said. Her sitters stood up, more than a little puzzled, and in Mrs. Ormerod's case, outraged. And they walked out into the hall. You haven't heard the last of this, Mrs. Marjorie Potts. Yeah, hissed Mrs. Ormerod. Sorry, my dyslexia's showing up. Clutching her handbag to her breast, and she slammed the door. Then her muffled voice echoed from the hallway. And you can tell all Ron that he hasn't heard the last of this either. Tracy, and the name on her scooter's only driving license, was indeed Marjorie Potts. Here, hold on 1 second. I'll be right back. And I'm back. Alright. So where was I? Went into the kitchen and turned off the sprouts. She put on the kettle. She made herself a pot of tea. She sat down at the table, got out 2 cups, filled both of them. She added 2 sugars to one of them. Then she paused. No sugar for me, please, said Madame Tracy. She lined up the cups on the table in front of her and took a long sip from the tea with sugar. Now, she said in a voice that anyone who knew her would have recognized as her own, although they might not have recognized her tone of voice, which was cold with rage. Suppose you tell me what this is all about, and it had better be good. A lorry had shed its load all over the M6, according to its manifest. The lorry had been filled with sheets of corrugated iron, although the 2 police patrolmen were having difficulty in accepting this. So what I want to know is, where did all the fish come from? asked the sergeant. I told you. They fell from the sky. 1 minute I'm driving along at 60, the next whap. A 12-pound salmon smashes through the windscreen. So I pulls the wheel over and I skidded on that. He pointed to the remains of a hammerhead shark under the lorry and ran into that. That was a 30-foot high heap of fish of different shapes and sizes. Have you been drinking, sir? Asked the sergeant, less than hopefully. Of course I haven't been drinking, you great wazzock. You can see fish, can't you? On the top of the pile, a rather large octopus waved a languid tentacle at them. The sergeant resisted the temptation to wave back. The police constable was leaning into the police car, talking on the radio. Corrugated iron and fish blocking off the southbound M6 about half a mile north of Junction 10. We're going to have to close off the whole southbound carriageway yet. The rain redoubled. A small trout, which had miraculously survived the fall, gamely began to swim toward Birmingham. That was wonderful, said Newt. Good, said Anathema. The earth moved for everyone. She got up off the floor, leaving her clothes scattered across the carpet, and went into the bathroom. Newt raised his voice. I mean, it was really wonderful. Really, really wonderful. I always hoped it was going to be, and it was. There was a sound of running water. What are you doing? He asked, taking a shower. Oh, he wondered vaguely if everyone had to shower afterwards or if it was just women. And he had a suspicion that bidets came into it somewhere. Tell you what, said Newt, as Anathema came out of the bathroom swathed in a fluffy pink towel. We could do it again. Nope, she said, not now. She finished drying herself and started picking up clothes from the floor and unself-consciously pulling them on. Newt, a man who was prepared to wait half an hour for a free changing cubicle at the swimming baths, rather than face the possibility of having to disrobe in front of another human being, found himself vaguely shocked and deeply thrilled. Bits of her kept appearing and disappearing like a conjurer's hands. Newt kept trying to count her nipples and failing, although he didn't mind. Why not? Said Newt. Wait, how many nipples did she? Never mind. Okay. He was about to point out that it might not take long, but an inner voice counseled him against it. He was growing up quite quickly in a short time. Anathema shrugged, not an easy move when you're pulling on a sensible black skirt. She said we only did this once. Newt opened his mouth 2 or 3 times, then said, She didn't. She bloody didn't. She couldn't predict that. I don't believe it. Anathema, fully dressed, walked over to her card index, pulled one out, and passed it to him. Newt read it and blushed and gave it back, tight-lipped. It wasn't simply the fact that Agnes had known and had expressed herself in the most transparent of codes. It was that down the ages, various devices had scrawled encouraging little comments in the margin. She passed him the damp towel. Here, she said, hurry up. I've got to make the sandwiches, and we've got to get ready. He looked at the towel. What's this for? Your shower. Ah, so it was something men and women both did. He was pleased. He'd got that sorted out. But you'll have to make it quick, she said. Why? Have we got to get out of here in the next 10 minutes before the building explodes? Oh no, we've got a couple hours. It's just that I've used up most of the hot water and you've got a lot of plaster in your hair. The storm blew a dying gust around Jasmine Cottage, and holding the damp pink towel no longer fluffy, in front of him, strategically, Newt edged off to take a cold shower. In Shadwell's dream, he is floating high above a village green. In the center of the green is a huge pile of kindling wood and dry branches. In the center of the pile is a wooden stake. Men and women and children stand around it on the grass, eyes bright, cheeks pink, expectant, excited. A sudden commotion. 10 men walk across the green, leading a handsome middle-aged woman. She must have been quite striking in her youth. And the word vivacious creeps into Shadwell's dreaming mind. In front of her walks Witchfinder Private Newton Pulsifer. No, it wasn't Newt. The man is older, dressed in black leather. Shadwell recognizes approvingly the ancient uniform of Witchfinder Major. The woman climbs onto the pyre, thrusts her hands behind her, and is tied to the stake. The pyre is lit. She speaks to the crowd, says something, but Shadwell is too high to hear what it is. The crowd gathers around her. A witch, thinks Shadwell. They're burning a witch. It gives him a warm feeling. That was the right and proper way of things. That's how things were meant to be. Only... She looked directly up at him now and says, that goes for you as well, you daft old fool. Only she is going to die. She is going to burn to death. And Shadwell realizes in his dream it is a horrible way to die. The flames lick higher, and the woman looks up. She is staring straight at him, invisible though he is, and she is smiling. And then it all goes boom. A crash of thunder. That was thunder, thought Shadwell as he woke up with the unshakable feeling that someone was still staring at him. He opened his eyes, and 13 glass eyes watched from the various shelves of Madame Tracy's boudoir, staring out from a variety of fuzzy faces. He looked away and into the eyes of someone staring intently at him. It was him. Ah, he thought in terror. I'm having one of them out-of-your-body experiences. I can see my own self, and I'm a goner this time right enough. He made frantic swimming motions in an effort to reach his own body, and then, as these things do, the perspectives clicked into place. Shadwell relaxed and wondered why anyone would want to put a mirror on his bedroom ceiling. He shook his head, baffled. He climbed up out of the bed, pulled on his boots, and stood up warily. Something was missing. A cigarette. He thrust his hands deep into his pockets, pulled out a tin, and began to roll a cigarette. He'd been dreaming, he knew. Shadwell didn't remember the dream, but it made him feel uncomfortable, whatever it was. He lit the cigarette, and he saw his right hand, the ultimate weapon, the doomsday device. He pointed one finger at the one-eyed teddy bear on the mantelpiece. Bang, he said, and chuckled dustily. He wasn't used to chuckling, and he began to cough, which meant he was back on familiar territory. He wanted something to drink. A sweet can of condensed milk. Madame Tracy would have some. He stomped out of her boudoir, heading toward the kitchen. Outside the little kitchen, he paused. She was talking to someone, a man. So what exactly do you want me to do about this? She was asking. Ugh, you bailed him, shuddered Shadwell. She had one of her gentleman callers in there, obviously. To be frank, dear lady, my plans at this point are perforce somewhat fluid. Shadwell's blood ran cold. He marched through the bead curtain shouting, "The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah taking advantage of a defenseless whore over my dead body." Madame Tracy looked up and smiled at him. There wasn't anyone else in the room. "Where is he?" asked Shadwell. "Whom?" asked Madame Tracy. "Some southern pansy," he said. "I heard him. He was in here suggesting things to you. I heard him." Madame Tracy's mouth opened and a voice said, "Not just a southern pansy, Sergeant Shadwell. The southern pansy." Shadwell dropped his cigarette. He stretched out his arm, shaking slightly, and pointed his hand at Madame Tracy. "Demon!" he croaked. "No," said Madame Tracy in the voice of a demon. "Now I know what you're thinking. Sergeant Shadwell, you're thinking that any second now this head is going to go round and round and I'm going to start vomiting pea soup. Well, I'm not. I'm not a demon, and I'd like you to listen to what I have to say." "Demon spawn, be silent," ordered Shadwell. I'll listen to your wicked lies." Do you know what this is? It's a hand, 4 fingers, 1 thumb. It's already exercised 1 of your number this morning. I'll get ye out of this good woman's head, or I'll blast ye to kingdom come. That's the problem, Mr. Shadwell, said Madame Tracy in her own voice. Kingdom come. It's going to. That's the problem. Mr. Aziraphale has been telling me all about it. Now, stop being an old silly, Mr. Shadwell. Sit down and have some tea, and he'll explain it to you as well. I'll ne'er listen to his hellish blandishments, woman, said Shadwell. Madame Tracy smiled at him. You old silly, she said. He could have handled anything else. He sat down, but he didn't lower his hand. The swinging overhead signs proclaimed that the southbound carriage was closed, and a small forest of orange cones had sprung up, redirecting motorists onto a co-opted lane of the northbound carriageway. Other signs directed motorists to slow down to 30 miles per hour. Police cars herded the drivers around like red-striped sheepdogs. The 4 bikers ignored all the signs and cones in the police cars and continued down the empty southbound carriageway of the M6. The other 4 bikers just behind them slowed a little. Shouldn't we, stop or something? Asked really cool people. Yeah, could be a pileup, said treading in dog shit, formerly all foreigners, especially the French, formerly things not working properly, even after you've given them a good thumping, never actually no longer, or no alcohol lager, briefly embarrassing personal problems, formerly known as scuzz. We're the other 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, said GBH. We do what they do, we follow them. They rode south. I'm gonna go turn on a light because it's getting dark. Let there be a light. And I'm back. It'll be a world just for us, said Adam. Everything's always been messed up by other people, but we can get rid of all of it and start again. Won't that be great? You are, I trust, familiar with the Book of Revelations, said Madame Tracy with Aziraphale's voice. I, said Shadwell, who wasn't. His biblical expertise began and ended with Exodus chapter 22, verse 18, which concerned witches, the suffering to live of, and why you shouldn't. He had once glanced at verse 19, which was about putting to death people who lay down with beasts, but he had felt that this was rather outside his jurisdiction. Then you have heard of the Antichrist. I, said Shadwell, who had seen a film once which explained it all. Something about sheets of glass falling off lorries and slicing people's heads off. As he recalled, no proper witches to speak of. He'd gone to sleep halfway through. The Antichrist is alive on Earth at this moment, Sergeant. He is bringing about Armageddon, the day of judgment, even if he himself does not know it. Heaven and hell are both preparing for war, and it's all going to be very messy. Shadwell merely grunted. I'm not actually permitted to act directly in this matter, Sergeant, but I am sure that you can see that the imminent destruction of the world is not something any reasonable man would permit. Am I correct? I suppose, said Shadwell, sipping condensed milk from a rusting can Madame Tracy had discovered under the sink. Then there's only one thing to be done, and you are the only man I can rely on. The Antichrist must be killed. Sergeant Shadwell, and you must do it. Shadwell frowned. I wouldn't know about that, he said. The Witchfinder Army only kills witches. 'Tis one of the rules in demons and imps, of course. But the Antichrist is more than just a witch. He's the witch. He's just about as witchy as he can get. Would he be harder to get rid of than, say, a demon? Asked Shadwell, who had begun to brighten. Not much more, said Aziraphale, who had never done other to get rid of demons than to hint to them very strongly that he, Aziraphale, had some work to be getting on with, and wasn't it getting late, and Crowley always got the hint. Shadwell looked down at his right hand and smiled. Then he hesitated. This Antichrist, how many nipples has he? The end justifies the means, thought Aziraphale, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And he lied cheerfully and convincingly. Oodles, lots of them. His chest is covered with them. He makes Diana the Ephesians look positively nippleless. I wouldn't know about this Diana of yours, said Shadwell, but if he's a witch, and it sounds to me like he is, and speaking as a sergeant in the WA, I'm your man. Good, said Aziraphale, through Madame Tracy. Not sure about this killing business, said Madame Tracy herself, but if it's this man and this Antichrist or everybody else, then I suppose we don't really have a choice. Exactly, dear lady, she replied. Now, Sergeant Shadwell, have you a weapon? Shadwell rubbed his hand with his left clenching and unclenching fist. Aye, he said, I have that. And he raised 2 fingers to his lips, blew on them gently. There was a pause. Your hand, asked Aziraphale. Aye, 'tis a terrible weapon. It did for you, demon spawn, did it not? Have you anything more substantial? How about a golden dagger of Megiddo, or the shiv of Kali? Shadwell shook his head. I've got some pins, he suggested, and the thunder gun of Witchbinder Colonel, ye shall not eat any living thing with the blood, neither shall ye use enchantment nor observe times, Dalrymple. I could load it with silver bullets. That's werewolves, I believe, said Aziraphale. Garlic? Vampires? Shadwell shrugged. I will. I do not have fancy bullets anyway, but the thunder gun will fire anything. I'll go and fetch it. And he shuffled out, thinking, why do I need a weapon? I'm a man with a hand. Now, dear lady, said Aziraphale, I trust you have a reliable mode of transportation at your disposal. Oh, yes, said Madame Tracy. She went over to the corner of the kitchen and picked up a pink motorbike helmet with a yellow sunflower painted on it and put it on, strapping it under her chin. Then she rummaged in the cupboard, pulling out 3 or 4 plastic shopping bags and a heap of yellowing local newspapers, even a dusty day-glow green helmet with Easy Rider written across the top, a present from her niece Petula 20 years before. Shadwell, returning with the thunder gun over his shoulder, stared at her unbelieving. Don't know what you're staring at, Mr. Shadwell, she told him. It's parked in the road downstairs. She passed him the helmet. You've got to put it on. It's the law. I don't think you're really allowed to have 3 people on a scooter, even if 2 of them are sharing, but it's an emergency and, hold on, my back is itchy. Sorry. It had to be done. Alright. And I'm sure you'll be quite safe if you hold on to me nice and tight. And she smiled. Won't that be fun? Shadwell paled, muttered something inaudible, and put on the green helmet. What was that, Mr. Shadwell? Madame Tracy looked at him sharply. I say, devil ding a divot off your wham with a flotter spade, said Shadwell. That'll be enough of that kind of language, Mr. Shadwell, said Madame Tracy, and she marched him out of the hall and down the stairs to Crouch End High Street, where an elderly scooter awaited the two of them. We'll call it three of them away. The lorry blocked the road, and the corrugated iron blocked the road, and a 30-foot high pile of fish blocked the road. It was one of the most effectively blocked roads the sergeant had ever seen. The rain wasn't helping. Any idea when the bulldozers are likely to get here? He shouted into his radio. We're doing the best, came the reply. He felt something tugging at his trouser cuff and looked down. Lobsters! He gave a little skip and a jump and wound up on top of the police car. Lobsters! He repeated. There were about 30 of them, some over 2 feet long. Some of them were on their way up the motorway. Half a dozen had stopped to check out the police car. Something wrong, Sarge? Asked the police constable, who was taking down the lorry driver's details on the hard-shouldered. I just don't like lobsters, said the sergeant, grimly shutting his eyes. Bring me out in a rash, too many legs. I'll just sit up here a bit and you can tell me when they've all gone. He sat up on the top of the car in the rain and felt the water seeping into the bottom of his trousers. There was a low roar. Thunder? No, it was continuous and getting closer. Motorbikes. The sergeant opened one eye. Jesus Christ. There were 4 of them. And they had to be doing over 100. He was about to climb down, to wave at them, to shout, but they were past him, heading straight for the upturned lorry. There was nothing the sergeant could do. He closed his eyes again and listened for the collision. He could hear them coming closer, then whoosh, 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 with a voice in his head that said, I'll catch up with the rest of you. Did you see that? Asked really cool people. They flew right over it. Kennel, said GBH. If they can do it, we can too. The sergeant opened his eyes. He turned to the police constable and opened his mouth. The police constable said, They flew right. Thud, 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 splat. There was another rain of fish, although of shorter duration and more easily explicable. A leather-jacketed arm waved feebly from the large pile of fish. A motorbike's wheels spun hopelessly. That was Scuzz, semi-conscious, deciding that if there was one thing he hated even more than the French, it was being up to his neck in fish with what felt like a broken leg. He truly hated that. He wanted to tell GBH about his new role, but couldn't move. Something wet and slippery slithered up one sleeve. Later, when they dragged him out of the fish pile, and he'd seen the other 3 bikers with the blankets over their heads, he'd realized he was too late to tell them anything. That was why they hadn't been in that book of Revelations Pigdog had been going on about. They never made it that far down the motorway. Scuzz muttered something. The police sergeant leaned over. Don't try to speak, son, he said. The ambulance will be here soon. Listen, croaked Scuzz. Got something important to tell you. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, they're right bastards, all 4 of them. He's delirious, announced the sergeant. I'm sorry not. I'm people covered in fish. Gross cousin pasta. Alright, that was a good one. Hold up. The lead-in traffic. People covered with fish. Oh, that brought brought tears to mine eyes. Okay. Alright. The London traffic system is many hundreds of times more complex than anyone imagines. This has nothing to do with influences, demonic or angelic. It has more to do with geography and history and architecture. Mostly this works to people's advantage, although they'd never believe it. London was not designed for cars. Come to that, it wasn't designed for people, it just sort of happened. This created problems, and the solutions that were implemented became the next problems, 5 or 10 or 100 years down the line. The latest solution had been the M25, a motorway that formed a rough circle around the city. Up until now, the problems had been fairly basic things, like it being obsolete before they'd finished. Or building it. Einsteinian tailbacks that eventually became tail forwards, that kind of thing. The current problem is that it didn't exist, not in normal human spatial terms anyway. The tailback of cars unaware of this or trying to find alternate routes out of London stretched into the city center from every direction. For the first time ever, London was completely gridlocked. The city was one huge traffic jam. Cars, in theory, give you a terrifically fast method of traveling from place to place. Traffic jams, on the other hand, give you a terrific opportunity to stay still. In the rain, in the gloom, while around you, the cacophonous symphony of horns grew ever louder and more exasperated. Crowley was getting sick of it. He'd taken the opportunity to reread Aziraphale's notes and to thumb through Agnes Netter's prophecies and to do some serious thinking. His conclusions could be summarized as followed. 1. Armageddon was underway. 2. There was nothing Crowley could do about this. 3. It was going to happen in Tadfield, or to begin there at any rate. After that, it was going to happen everywhere. Crowley was in hell's bad books. Aziraphale was, as far as could be estimated, out of the equation. Not that hell has any other kind of books. 6. All was black, gloomy, and awful. There was no light at the end of the tunnel, or if there was light, it was an oncoming train. 7. He might just as well find a nice little restaurant and get completely and utterly pissed out of his mind while he waited for the world to end. And 8. And yet... And that was where it all fell apart, because underneath it all, Crowley was an optimist. If there was one rock-hard certainty that had sustained him through the bad times, he thought briefly of the 14th century, then it was utter surety that he would come out on top, that the universe would look after him. Okay, so hell was down on him, so the world was ending, so the Cold War was over, the Great War was starting for real. So the odds against him were higher than a van load of hippies on a blotter full of Owsley's old original. There was still a chance. Sorry, that's funny. There's a synchronicity that has happened that I just realized. There was still a chance. It was all a matter of being in the right place at the right time. The right place was Tadfield. He was certain of that, partly from the book, partly from some other sense. In Crowley's mental map of the world, Tadfield was throbbing like a migraine. The right time was getting there before the end of the world. He checked his watch. He had 2 hours to get to Tadfield, although probably even the normal passage of time was pretty shaky by now. Crowley tossed the book onto the passenger seat. I'm going to save this spot because that was funny. I need to remember that. Desperate times, desperate measures. He had maintained the Bentley without a scratch for 60 years. What the hell? He reversed suddenly, causing severe damage to the front of a red Renault 5 behind him, and drove up onto the pavement. He turned on his lights and sounded his horn. That should give any pedestrian sufficient warning he was coming, and if they couldn't get out of the way, well, it'll all be the same in a couple of hours, maybe, probably. Hi-ho, said Anthony Crowley, and drove away. There were 6 women and 4 men, and each of them had a telephone and a thick wad of computer printout covered with the names and telephone numbers. By each of the numbers was a penned notation saying whether the person dialed was in or out, whether the number was currently connected, and most importantly, whether or not anybody who answered the phone was avid for cavity wall insulation to enter their lives. Most of them weren't. The 10 people sat there, hour after hour, cajoling, pleading, promising through plastic smiles between calls. They made notations of coffee and marveled at the rain flooding down the windows. They were staying at their posts like the band on the Titanic. If you couldn't sell double glazing in weather like this, you couldn't sell it at all. Lisa Morrow was saying, "Now, if you'll only let me finish, sir." "Yes, I understand that, sir, but if you'll only..." And then, seeing that he'd just hung up on her, she said, "Well, up your snot face." She put down the phone. "I got another bath," she announced to her fellow telephone salesperson. She was well out in the lead in the office, daily getting people out of the bath stakes, and only needed 2 more points to win the weekly Coitus Interruptus award. She dialed the next number on the list. Lisa had never intended to be a telephone salesperson. What she really wanted to be was an international glamorous jet setter, but she didn't have the O levels. Had she been studious enough to be accepted as an internationally glamorous jet setter or a dental assistant, her second choice of profession, or indeed anything other than a telephone salesperson in that particular office, she would have a longer and probably more fulfilled life. Perhaps not a very much longer life, all things considered, it being the day of Armageddon, but several hours anyway. For that matter, all she really needed to do for a longer life was not ring the number she had just dialed, listed on her sheet as the Mayfair home of the best traditions of the 10th hand mail order list, Mr. A.J. Crowley. But she had dialed, and she had waited while it rang 4 times. She had said, "Oh, poot, another answer phone," and started to put down the handset. But then something climbed out of the earpiece, something very big and very angry. Alright, I'm going to stop here, and we will continue onward on the next one. We're getting so close to the end, and I don't want it to end yet. So, yes, I will see you on the next one. I hope you guys have a great time doing whatever it is that you're doing next. Oh, and I also forgot, I brought this up, my Aleister Crowley deck, which I'm going to be reading from on my next tarot reading on my other channel. If you're not aware of that, comment below and I'll send you a link. So yes, namaste. I will see you guys later.